But I'd like to focus on one aspect of what I believe is the early modern period, and that's technology. And the technology in particular that I'd like to focus on is printing. And printing, the effects that printing have, and the ramifications that it has, in particular for religious life. And to do so, I've chosen a text that was first published in 1577, but I'll talk a little bit more about its background. As you note, I've provided an English translation, but the main body of the text is not in Hebrew, but rather in Yiddish. There's secondary texts that we'll refer to at the end that are in Hebrew, but they're from an earlier period. So we'll focus on the English translation, and those who would like to correct my Yiddish, I'll be happy for the suggestions. Now, the author of the book is someone named Benjamin Slonik. And Benjamin Slonik was from the town of Grodno in Lithuania. And at this time was probably in his late 20s when he wrote this book, but he would later become perhaps the leading rabbi of Poland until his death, probably after 1520. 1620, I'm sorry, after 1620, yes. The book was written in Krakow, where he was studying. He had studied with Rav Moshe Isserles in the 1570s, and appears after the publication of Shulchan Aruch and Yoredea. Okay, so Shulchan Aruch has already been published. The book focuses on three commandments that women, from already the time of the Mishnah, are particularly commanded in, and that is mitzvah chala, nida, and hadlakat haner. Now, this is not the first such work. There was a manuscript from 1504 that's now held in Cambridge, but was originally prepared in Italy, in northern Italy, that dealt with this issue. And it too was written in Yiddish. Now, to be remembered, in the late 15th century and 16th century and into the early 17th century, there's a large Ashkenazic Jewish community in northern Italy, and their mother tongue is, or at least tongue, is Yiddish. The book is also published in a different format in 1535 in Krakow, and it is probably the second Yiddish book published. So it's published there too, and it's published in the form of a handbook. In other words, it's meant to be something small that you can more or less put in your, if not pocket, at least in your little bag and carry it around.
The Seder machine is...
Seder machine, a different version, but it's published, right. It's published again in Venice in 1552, again in a different version. But 1577 sees a revolution in the type and the nature of the book and what the book contains and how the material is presented. And that's something that interests me, is the presentation. The book is very, very successful. It's republished in 1585, 1595, 1603 in Basel. So this book services the greater Yiddish-speaking community. It's not just for Poland, but clearly it's for Poland, and Ken will appreciate this. The reason that we know it's clearly for Poland is the use of food words. Instead of using as in the Italian word, you might have pagalini, or you have pierogi and other such Eastern European terms that we know are Slavic and clearly for the Polish audience, but apparently most other things in the book could be understood. There are a few Slavic words in the book, so that suggests that it comes from his own region. But not only does it appear in Yiddish, but eventually in 1616, it'll appear in Italian translation by a Jew from Central Europe who will move to Italy, and he will translate it into Italian for all those Jews, Ashkenazic Jews, who have forgotten Yiddish and now only know Italian. So it'll have a life in Italian as well. There's no question that the book is written for women, but as we'll see in a few moments, it's also written for men. And what I'd like to do is focus on some of the things in the text itself and see what we can learn. So if you take a look in the first paragraph, I'll just read, "We shall praise God, for he is worthy of praise. He rules above and below. He nourishes all creatures. It is for this reason that we wanted to write a lovely booklet for women, for the betterment of the body and the adornment of the soul, unlike songs and tales. Rather, containing only God-fearing things, that everyone should know what to observe and what to avoid." What's of interest here, I think, historically, is unlike song and tales. This is the competing literature. Women of the time are reading novels. not necessarily Jewish novels. Dietrich von Bern is a bestseller, and it's nothing really very Jewish about it. Jews can apparently read German books, and there are other books that are written in Yiddish. Now, this has ramifications beyond the little book that we have before us. And one of the areas is in Bible translation. The first Bible translations, actually the first two Bible translations, were absolute failures and flops, because they tended to be literal translations. In the 1540s, in Constance and in Augsburg, there were two translations of the Pentateuch, not the whole Bible, just the Pentateuch, was translated. These were never used again. All subsequent translations of books of the Bible contained retelling of the Bible. They add stories, Meislach get added, until finally we'll reach the ultimate pinnacle of this will be the Seno Arena. The Seno Arena is essentially not a translation of the Bible, but based on the Bible tells more stories. That's what people liked. This is true in translations of Shir Shirim, it's true in translations of Daniel, it's true in translations of Yeshayahu, 1570s, 1580s, 1590s. People don't like literal translations. They like translations that are a little more lively, tells a little more stories. And that's true here too. This is not simply a book of halakha telling you what to do this, do that. It comes with stories. It comes with reasons why you should do this that are connected to stories. The idea is to make it not only something that's useful, but something that's a good read. It's entertaining. You have to convince people they're going to put down Robert Ludlow and read Benjamin Slonik. This seems to be an attempt by the religious establishment, so to speak, or the rabbinic elite, to try to confront what people are reading. Instead of just wasting your time, rather containing only God-fearing things that everyone should know what to observe and what to avoid. It's not enough just to read books. You have to read the right sort of books. This is an attempt to combat what's happening in the street, and apparently is successful, and you wouldn't have the reprintings if it wasn't somewhat successful.
Yeah, so I'll speak on one thing.
Sure.
You say it's an attempt of a rabbinical elite to control...
Not control, combat.
Combat,
okay. Control you can't control. Combat you can combat. Okay.
I'm wondering to what extent Slonik, age 20,
late 20s, yeah.
Late 20s, yeshiva bocher, out of yeshiva, but still not with a community. I understand how you could, whether he's a rabbinical elite or represents a rabbinical elite trying to combat something, or whether he is an individual trying to make money in a new with a new economic opportunity which is open up to all. Which is to say there's a kind of from top-down reading and there's a from bottom-up reading of what's going on here.
You have to have a lot of self-confidence to believe that a new book that you're going to write is going to be a bestseller. Now, it's possible that he could make money, but in those days, don't forget, the amount of money to be made printing is also money to be invested in printing. You don't get an upfront. At least to the best of my knowledge, you don't get an upfront in 1577. It's possible that he wants, there's an economic side. I can't say that I know. I don't know the answer. But I do think that he does represent, even in the age of 25 plus, you're no longer a yeshiva bacher, right? Not in that day and age. You're already someone who has education. In this case, he's someone who studied both with Israelis and with Luria. That already, you have status, and he has status. I'd like to jump down to third paragraph. When at time one finds a young bride who does not know the measure of challah, and similarly with respect to her menstrual period, when her life depends on it, she can sin and thus bring harm to her children, for the commandment of nida is divided into many varied topics. One can spoil an entire dress because of a small beet stain. Anyone who makes borscht with a white dress will appreciate that. This means that one can ruin the body with one small thing, for which the soul must suffer great discomfort. Now, this idea of bringing harm to your children, even unborn children, is not new. This appears in Hasidei Ashkenaz. However, I think that educationally speaking, what the author is doing is using fear as a force of education. You can't control certain things in life. And putting those things in the hands of God and saying, if you don't do this, then your children will ultimately suffer, is a way of education. You may not like it, You may not want to use it yourself, but in 1577 it seems to be in print an acceptable thing to do, and he uses it. I assume it was done in sermons well before, and orally. But at least in print, there's one first instance that I know of that they're using these threats of what will happen. Don't do this because this will happen. And children, of course, are a logical thing to do, to use. Sure.
Number one, I was taken aback a bit by the, on the one hand, strong language of her life depends upon it, and then the strange language of ruining the dress with a beat. And I think that it's worth mentioning for those who haven't checked the Yiddish, I'm sure you know this, that this is rhyme and prose.
This section is, yeah.
Right, it's rhyme and prose. And therefore, some of these weirder formulations resemble the beat, spickle, it rhymes with article. And you know, I think it's, I'm just mentioning this ultimately in terms of presentation of the text, that the reader who has a sense that it's intended to rhyme prose will therefore have a better sense of the choice of words. But secondly, as far as content is concerned, I think that when the author says that her life depends upon it, there's an allusion to the statement made in one of the minor tractates that a woman who has sexual relations in the state of Nida, her children are mamzerim, her children are equivalent bastards, is something that in the 13th century, for example, one of the Tosfists who comes to the island of Crete and is unhappy with the mikveh attendants there, gives them a sermon in which he says that you should know that having relations during period of impurity will produce children with mamzerim.
I don't think he's worried about mamzerim at all. First of all,
I think he's worried about it, but I think that's the illusion.
Ben Need, I don't even think he's worried about either, because I think that overestimating the audience. I think that the audience is not aware of all the halachic ramifications. Your children are going to be maimed. They're going to be disformed or die in childbirth. That's what they're worried about. It's a real ultimate fear. The halachic ramifications of the Ben Nida, that's...
I didn't mean the halachic because...
right, that's...
right, but I'm referring to the minor tractate as folklore.
As folklore, perhaps...
As part of that, simply as part of that modern world of folklore, maimed, or as some rabbis say, mamzer.
Okay.
And the folklore... No, it's rabbinic. It's rabbinic. But all cases, when the Tosfos came to Candia, he told them...
In Candia, maybe it worked. I don't think... I think so. Okay.
I don't see such a disjunction between the two statements. You know, be worried about your children and be worried about a stain on the dress, because they're both rather direct in dealing with things that are concrete from everyday, ordinary, real life. And I see them all together actually quite nicely.
That's right. I think that I just want to go on a little bit. We'll come back to some other points. Okay? The next paragraph. A man may also take delight in this booklet. So here's an address that clearly men as well are addressed. For there are some wives who cannot read. Now we come to the issue of literacy. There are some people who simply can't read. Such a wife must often err. Therefore her husband may instruct her so that she will take care of her matters well and not sin away both worlds. That is, this world and the next world. Clearly, literacy is an issue here. Just because the book is in Yiddish doesn't mean that every woman could read it. Nor, by the way, doesn't mean every man can read it. One of the other issues that's mentioned in the body of the book is your husband may be illiterate and the woman can read. You can read, or education takes place not only in terms, even in a written text, not only in terms of silent reading. There's oral transmission. That is, books can be read out loud. Not only that, once somebody reads it and becomes knowledgeable, they can pass knowledge on to others. So, the assumption is that the person who's reading this book is literate, but people in that person's immediate circle may not be. Share the knowledge. But literacy is not universal, not even in 1577 and not in Krakow. Not everyone knows how to read, and not even Yiddish. Okay, so many people are still illiterate. The hope is that knowledge can be shared. Now, knowledge, of course, will be shared through books. And just one second. Knowledge will be shared through books, and that's in the next paragraph. Now, not everyone knows what is a proper deed and what is a sin. Therefore, buy this book quickly. quickly. And it is a small book. For no one need earn better interest than the great reward that God will provide. You don't want to lay out the money. It costs too much. Think of what the ultimate reward will be in the next world. What are you worried about the kopeck or two? And we'll see in the next page, we'll talk about a groschen or two. Okay.
I just think we should make explicit the point that in terms of representing the modern period, that this book is representative of a trend to take women from being cultural bystanders and make them more cultural participants.
That's right. I think that that's coming up next. Okay? But thanks for the lead. Next paragraph. Fourth line. And it will also be easier for her, for she will know her precepts well and will not need to ask a rabbi. For at times when one does not properly understand something and has no rabbi, or she is embarrassed in his presence, not every woman wants to show her underwear to a rabbi. She makes something that is not straightforward kosher, and if she should consult a rabbi about it, it might clearly be forbidden. Or she might declare something prohibited and very serious for herself that she need not have done, for it is not God's will. This is an attempt to educate the laity, and in that sense, not only women, but it also disengage them from the need to always ask rabbis. It outwardly says here, you don't always ask a rabbi. Learn the law. Now, it's not saying, if you have a complicated question regarding this and that, you don't have to go to a rabbi. No, that's no question. He says a number of times in the text, this is very complicated. For example, a woman who sees blood in her urine, that's a complicated issue. Go ask a rabbi. But basic, simple questions, you don't have to go ask a rabbi. And women have a tendency, or so he says, either to be embarrassed, or we know from other texts, they're not sure. So they're either machmirot, they are stringent upon themselves, or here he says also that they're not. But one way or the other, it's an attempt to free them. And freeing them comes through the use of the vernacular. Now, the use of the vernacular in texts is new, specifically in legal texts. In the 15th century, the Maharil, Rav Yaakov Molin, came out specifically against publicizing or writing legal handbooks for women in Yiddish. He says, are you kidding? They wrote some Yiddish books for shochtim, and look at all the mistakes they made. You want to give it to women? You're out of your mind. He said, I'm against it. And clearly that carried through for at least a generation or two in German communities, that Jews would not publicize, they would not popularize the law through the use of the vernacular. It's only when we get to the end of the 15th century that there seems to be some attempt to say, look, we can't live with this, we have to somehow educate people. And education takes place through the means of printing, but through the use of the vernacular. Publishing legal books in Yiddish is a new idea. It will carry over beyond just books for women, and we'll see it in books for ritual slaughterers will be printed. There'll be books on how to salt meat. There will not be, to the best of my knowledge, in the 16th century, there are no books on how to write a get in Yiddish. Because writing a get is something that really a specialist has to do. But those sort of secondary religious people, that is the slaughterers in particular, or even for teachers, those books will appear in Yiddish. Talia.
I'm glad you brought this up. I'm thinking of Tashma's article on the writing of manuals in the 13th and 14th centuries for shochatim, mohalim, for people who, this is the first time that we find works. The example is, if you want to learn how to tie your shoe, do you open up a book and learn the stages of tying a shoe, or do you learn mimetically? Do you learn by watching? And clearly, when you're talking about slaughter, when you're talking about brit milah, you're talking about something that has to be witnessed over and over and over again, and you do it by apprentice. It seems at least natural to know this by apprenticeship, and the legal details are secondary to that primary mode of learning. And so my question here is, you've got three different women's precepts. Surely women learn from their mothers, at least two of those three. That is to say, the issue of menstrual purity, which is the most complicated one, okay, well, I'm going to bracket that because I don't even have the...
Well, it's okay, you didn't have to, because the Maharil addressed that issue specifically. And he said the reason you don't have to prepare these books in Yiddish is they learn from their mothers.
Right.
Mothers are the best teachers.
Okay, so this is my question. I have some thoughts on why in the 13th and 14th century, undoubtedly because I'm leaning on Tashma, why these books came into being, not in Yiddish, not in the vernacular. But why so late? Is it because it's vernacular and it's print? Are these things happening for women? It's just the same phenomenon is happening because now there's vernacular and there's print and there's vernacular.
Well, I think it's happening for a number of reasons. But what allows it to happen, before I answer the first part, what allows it to happen is print, right? The jump into vernacular had been made already. It was already okay to publish in vernacular. But the print is what allows this to happen. Now, the question is why? Well, it seems to be one of the reasons, at least that Slonik gives, is the way the settlement of Jewish communities takes place. There are not rabbis everywhere to ask questions of. Jews in Poland live in far-flung places. In some places, there are only one or two Jewish families. We know from other material. There are only one or two Jewish families.
But I'm not sure that Jews who lived in the Rhineland...
I'm not saying they did. I'm just saying that here, that for him...
rabbis these questions.
No, but Talia, there's no apprenticeship where there's nobody to learn from.
That's the...
But if you live in a place where there's no kosher meat to be had, you can teach yourself how to do this, or at least fill in some of the gaps from having witnessed it once in a while. So there's a need for this when the population configuration changes.
I think that's putting the cart before the horse. I mean, in this case, every girl learns from her mother or her grandmother.
So it's not the same.
You don't need to have a level. Right. And I would also argue, and this is taken away from Ted's presentation, so we can talk about it later. I would say that the creation of the writing of these manuals for very hands-on practices may facilitate dispersion of communities when you don't have something to learn from, but you would still apprentice yourself to a ritual slaughterer to learn how to hold the knife and, how to hold down the animal and do a whole lot of other things. No book is ever going to be sufficient.
But Jewish law takes that into account, because you can't be a shochet without having some sort of Kabbalah. Right. That's not true regarding a woman, right? You can get married without a license of knowing Hilchot Nida. However, but I want to go back to something you said. This book, as opposed to all the books, the handbooks and manuscripts that came before, taught women all sorts of details that most women would never know. Okay, so by going on and telling how to work a veset out, okay, that's a menstrual cycle. How to work out a menstrual cycle for halachic purposes, that's something that hadn't appeared for women before, and that's something most women would not know. The 5 different types of veset is something most women would not know, my assumption is. They know more or less, look, if you bleed, you do A, B, and C. But once you get into anything, again, blood and urine, blood on different parts of the clothing, my guess is that most women didn't know, and if they did know, they just said, okay, that's it. 7 days. Don't forget, we live in the age of no birth control. Some women may have wanted to be separated from their husbands. They didn't want to be pregnant again. So whatever reasons there may be, but be all that as it may, by giving information, you have, at least as far as he's concerned, you have better observance.
Really quick. However it's couched, philosophy or not, it strikes me there's a tone here of taking individual responsibility. Even if somebody's saying you take the individual responsibility.
Agreed. I agree that there's individual responsibility. I want to go on because I'm almost at half time, and I'm not half time yet in what I need to do. In the next page, the last paragraph, what I've given you is the introduction and then a section. So at the end of that introduction, if there is something that she needs to look into very urgently, and she wants to find immediately, she should examine the list of sections in the back of the booklet. So she will find it in the booklet. For each precept is numbered. You will be able to proceed according to it. However, it would be better if you read that continually and became familiar with it so that you would not have to search. Welcome to the index. Okay, they're teaching readers how to use an index. The back of the book has a numbered index. This is new. We take for granted if you're working in public education, you have to tell your readers, look, it's better if you know the whole book by heart, obviously. But if you don't, look in the back, find the index. So again, in terms of education, in terms of print, There's a change here that's taking place. You're addressing women, you're going essentially to people who don't have experience with books. And now you have to teach them these things. There's an index. Now, the index existed before. We can even find in manuscripts their index. But again, you've come to an area of the population who's not familiar with it. Lady, you don't know what this is? It's an index. Okay. Now, I want to come to the section of how you educate. Not only, we'll discuss some things, but what I want to do is take one commandment and show how the education takes place in a different format. Section 3 discusses in an introductory way the lighting of candles. It's only introductory. He'll have later in the book, he'll be very specific about which type of wicks you can use, what type of oils you can use, where you can put it, when you can put it. This is introductory. In the beginning of 3, he says what the blessing should be. If you don't know the blessing, he translates the blessing into Yiddish for you. So if you look in Yiddish, he says it in Hebrew, and then he gives it in Yiddish. I haven't been successful in doing that so well in English, but... The second paragraph of that section, he says, and the commandment of kindling lights is commanded to women, and they are obligated to keep it because they have extinguished the light of the world and have darkened the world with their gluttony. For they wanted to eat from the apple, that is, back in the Garden of Eden. And on account of the sin that she ate the apple, therefore we, that is all human beings, must die. And because she has extinguished the light of our lives, so she must rekindle the lights. This is not new. This is already in older sources. What it says to the reader is, guilt, guilt, guilt. One reason that women have to light lights is because of guilt, essentially for, I try not to take too much from the church here, but original sin. Okay? This happened long ago. Your descendants bear responsibility for it.
Just to point out that Kava Weissler has written about how that text like this written by a man is kill, 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 whereas the Stina has to do with this, which may have been written by a man or not, but was written from a woman's point of view.
Well, I'll try to go one further in a moment. Okay. That even men, when they write for men, don't use guilt. Okay?
But the Stina that deals with this doesn't.
Right, and that's a 17th century Trina. Okay. Now, a little further on, about 5 lines up, last word on the line. And therefore the woman must kindle lights because she extinguished our light, and she must also suffer the pain of menstruation because she spilled our blood. Again, same idea. These things go on from generation to generation to generation. On the next page, 2, 4, 6.
Just a quick point.
Yes.
Our, is that a gender thing or is that a humanity thing?
Ours is humanity. Our blood, our life. And it was we, men too, suffer. Mortals, human beings, right. Go ahead, don't go ahead. Let me finish another sentence or two and then we'll go on. I'm just going to start from the beginning of the sentence, just above footnote number 6. Therefore, dear daughter, wake up and open your eyes and your deaf heart, and pay attention to a divine utterance, and do not take it all lightly, and see and mark well that the commandments can never be fully fathomed, for they guard the body from the tribulations of the grave, and the soul from the torment of hell. Forget philosophy, forget all the fancy readings. The reason you observe the commandments is plain and simple. If you don't, you'll go to hell, and you'll burn there. And he has a very graphic description later on in the book of what happens in hell because you didn't observe the commandments. Pins, the rolling, the laughing of the demons, how you'll burn, all those things. That's how you make people observe. On the other hand, he also will take a section and tell you of the rewards, how you'll enjoy, bask in the light of the Shekhinah. I don't like that.
No, all this stuff got into Judaism.
That's from the Italian. Is a different. How's that Judaism? Not Italian Judaism. The hell. Right. Dante took it from us. No, these descriptions are not new. These are old descriptions. But the point is, now you've put it in writing, and this is the way you're convincing women in the 16th century that in Poland, why you should observe the commandments. Just to go on, just going to skip a few lines. The line begins, I may well tell you, for when a woman does not have proper intent, she corrupts her children and the world's foundations. For no righteous person who is called the foundation of the world can be born at the same hour. And because of this, God, blessed be his name, notes this well and is saddened by all his creation. And therefore, we must unfortunately suffer in this diaspora, and our bodies and possessions are consumed. And who is responsible for this? The woman, when she does not want to bethink herself properly, and when she, God forbid, is not mindful of God's commandments. Yeah, see? Now we've taken it from the realm of her reward of the next world. We've taken it beyond her own children. The entire Jewish community suffers. That's correct.
Maybe that's why the book is, or does the men to buy it?
No, I think the women, that's just I think that's a pedagogic thing. But I think, read on, and a poor man can have no good fortune or well-being if not, that's the segue.
Does it strike you at all as significant that this isn't just saying observe the mitzvah, something that's external, but is talking about something that's interior and internal?
It doesn't strike me as being strange in Ashkenazic Jewry at all. In Ashkenazic Jewry, internal thoughts are certainly part of the process. I think what he's done is here he's saying, look, it's not only a matter of doing the commandments, doing the mitzvot properly. That's sine qua non. Take it further. It's also one must have the proper intent in what one does. Now that's true in many, many things. But here...
It has to do with the sort of a watered down, not necessarily the popularization of Kabbalah, but watered down aspects of Kabbalah.
There's no question. There are aspects here of Kabbalah.
That stress the importance not only of action, but of intent and maybe...
I've shown, Boaz I hope, agree that there are certain aspects here in earlier manuscripts where the Zohar is specifically quoted.
And even the whole focus on the original sin.
Yeah, but that appears already in the Gemara. That appears in the Gemara, and he's taking it further. Right, here he's certainly focused much more. So there it's harder to say. By the way, it's not clear that Slonik, in the rest of his career, has any great interest in Kabbalah. He's not going to be one of these rabbinic Kabbalists. These things are things he may take.
I was quite differently. How in light of him using Zohar in this book, how non-Kabbalistic it is, then showing that really diffusion of Zohar is not necessarily adopting a Kabbalistic worldview.
That's right. That's right. And let's go back to something that was discussed yesterday. Here we have Kabbalah that's entered in, but
no theology.
That's right. That's right.
I just want to offer an alternate translation.
An alternate, sure. Just tell me from what?
About the kindling lights and the blood and all that.
Okay.
Woman is commanded to kindle light because from the apple she made us bite. And every month she must feel like crud because she also spilled our blood.
Kol hakavod. Mamash kol hakavod. I'll have to. Now, I'd like to compare this, and I'd like to show how this stands to a text that's written for men in Hebrew. And to do that, I brought a section from the Tur. Now, the Tur, written in the 14th century, clearly for a male audience, and Yehuda Galinsky has written a dissertation and published a number of articles on the Tur, and Orach Chaim and Yoredeh are clearly not written for laymen, they're written for rabbis. They're not written for Dayanim. Even Ezra and Choshen Mishpat are written for Dayanim, Orach Chaim and Yoredeh for the rabbi in the field. So the audience here are for rabbis, and he discusses the issue in Orach Chaim of lighting candles on Erev Shabbat. And he writes at the end of the page here in English, men and women are equally commanded to kindle the lights. However, women are especially charged with this command, as is explained in the Midrash, that Eve extinguished the light of the world, that is to say, she brought it about that Adam would die. And Maimonides gave a different explanation, saying that women were charged with this command because they are generally around the house and deal with domestic matters. It's a practical issue. Women tend to be around, so have them light. Now, both this text, certainly the Tur was available and Slonik knew of it. He copied from it in some sections of his book. But the Rambam's explanation is not included because it doesn't help I believe it doesn't help in furthering the message. The message is guilt. You observe commandments because of guilt, responsibility, whatever it might be. The fact that you're practically around the house doesn't help the author in his educational message. Just to make this even a little stronger, the next section from Shulchan Aruch in section 3. Here's Rav Yosef Karo writing. The book becomes available, certainly easily available in Krakow in the 1570s. In Krakow, where he is, and certainly Isserles had written a comment, his teacher had written it, and we know that Slonik had seen the book because he copies sections from Shulchan Aruch verbatim. Women are charged with fulfilling this command more than men, because women are generally found around the house and they deal with domestic matters. It's very simple. He doesn't mention at all the issue of guilt. In writing for men, what's the big deal? There's a practical reason why you give it to women. If a woman's not around, a man does it.
But it's also starting to change.
But the Rambam, in other words, you're saying except the Rambam.
Well, we're going to Karo.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Yeah, they're not going down that road.
That's right, they're not going that road. And Isserles doesn't have a need to come and say, no, the reason is for something else. The reason is of little importance here.
I don't think that somebody has a problem with this, because our Isserles' gloss is already...
Yes, they're available already. Isserles dies in 1572. It's published in 1570.
What gloss did Isserles give him?
No, there is no gloss.
There is no gloss.
If you look in the Hebrew, you'll see the small little gloss he gives on the end. You see at the end of Sif Gimel? V'mein yado mishkacha legnot yayin lekiddush v'legnot ner Chanukah ayin le'el siman tafresh ayin he. No, he's not interested in this. This is written for rabbis, it's written for students, it's not written for women. So the fact that Karo decides, I'm only going to give the practical rationale, whatever reason he has for only giving the practical rationale, fine, I'm not here to try to figure out. The point, what's of interest is, at least to me, in a handbook for women, you take the guilt route. In writing for men, there may be two reasons. The two is a rather inclusive work. You give both. The Shulchan Aruch is less, so you give up one issue.
It's not just that. It's okay, but still, this is for a different kind of readers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Shulchan Aruch, although it's more popular than the Yosef,
right,
but still, it is not intended to regular people to study and to read.
Right.
It's also that difference.
Yeah, there's no question.
So it's a different audience here. Totally, not just a different woman and men.
Well, right, the audience is totally different in the way the Shulchan Aruch doesn't try to convince people of why you should observe the law. The Shulchan Aruch assumes, that's right, just tell the law. The assumption is you're already committed to observing the law. Why bother trying to convince somebody? That's nowhere within the parameters of Shulchan Aruch why you should do it. The assumption is this is how you do it.
The way I tend to read a lot about when you're is to see, not to read Slonik as a kind of didactic tool, but more as representing an Ashkenazi view of women in a highly negative light. So that the guilt is not just to make them study, the guilt is actually what the women feel in the cultural construction of womanhood in Ashkenazi society. Which goes back to Hannah Weissler's text, that when the women try to deal with it, they try to deal with the texts that are written either by them or for them. They're trying to deal with this burden of guilt that they make on them, not necessarily just for didactic reasons, but as part of a cultural construction of gender. So that would be great depth, that's how I understood it.
I would like to suggest that there's Ashkenazi construction for men and women that involves if we think of Maharil's comments of the 15th century that were picked up in the Ramah, in Isserles' glosses, I think there's so much of an emphasis on the supernatural that applies equally to women and men. In other words, I think that the Sephardi model is the model of saying, okay, cut and dry, what's the law? Do it, this makes sense, get it done with. But for both women and men, in Ashkenaz, certainly before the Shulchan Aruch, and after it, I think there's a perpetuation of the non-systematic, the sense that even when it's not the understanding of the place of the individual in the cosmos and how, whether it's theurgic or not theurgic, how every single the performance of every precept kind of has much broader supernatural ramifications. I don't think it's just women who get sucked into this. I think Ashkenazi teachings do it for men as well.
Yes.
How I can agree with this. Why? We have, I don't know if you are aware about that, but there was a book, a very rare book,
printed in Constantinople in the 1560s, which is called ha-nashim.
Reprinted in Jerusalem.
Yeah, reprinted by a Sheni Green,
right,
who is Sfard. I'm not comparing, it's a totally different book than this one, but still, it is addressed to the wife of Hashem.
Careful. Oh, I'm sorry. That was, you said wife or what, or wide? Wide, I'm sorry.
No, I say wife.
No, that's fine.
No, and the same basic intentions, which is to make people more aware about this specific field of Ilchot Nida. He is a very interesting character anyway, in other fields also, a type of a Musar guy, not just in these laws, but also in other issues, public issues in Sephardi society. And I would say that is quite different from Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. So it depends to whom you address your writing, in my opinion.
But here, though, the ha-nashim is written for men, because he writes in the ha-nashim, first of all, he writes in Hebrew, and he says you should use this book to then educate the women.
Fine, but what I am saying is, but he tries to give other reasons.
Agreed.
And he doesn't stay with just with the dry law, but he gives in a lot of spiritual reasons and other ethical reasons to explain the law and make it more popular and accepted, and also to make these people be afraid or fear. That's the same attitude, basically. What is different that it is really addressed to men and not to women. Otherwise, there is also another parallel, partly, is the Ladino literature.
Right.
The same as the Yiddish literature. That you have, for example, Orach Chaim translated into Ladino.
Mm-hmm.
In this, I mean, it's a little bit later, but still you have the same attitude to make it open and readable to people who, I mean, even the Shulchan Aruch is too hard for them to comprehend. Therefore, they publish books in Hebrew characters, Ladino in Hebrew characters, not in Latin characters, just to make it more popular and to wider surface of population. That's all.
Right. But again, I think that exactly this point and shows that print is something as a technological revolution of the early modern age that extends beyond Eastern Europe, beyond Europe, and into the Ottoman Empire, and perhaps beyond. And I think that that's one of the education is one realm where this comes out, and that, of course, as you mentioned, the vernacular and other things. Moshe.
I just want to continue pushing business about how this is just one reflection of how I think the cultural role of women is changing in the early modern period. And I think it's one of the most important aspects of defining the early modern period, at least from Jewish point of view. First of all, there are many genres of literature that are now being directed towards women, not just this kind of halachic book. If you take the fact that the Christina, which at one time were not bound together as books, are now becoming books of prayers that women should use. Or, as you point out in the introduction to the translation which you haven't published yet, the architecture of the synagogue, that in Poland in this period they're building a Bible shul for women, and then eventually there's ha-nashim, which is an integral part of the synagogue itself. Plus, I think you can see from halachic sources that, and archival sources, that women are attending synagogue more than they were in the past. How far in the past, I don't know, but at least the immediate past. So all of this implies that women are moving closer to the center of the culture. And as I said before, becoming much more participants than bystanders. I think this is a major development that we have to pay attention to when we're talking about the women food.
I would like to
not disagree with these things, but to add to them another way. It seems to me that the danger is that what may be a reflection of simply demographics and sort of an expanding population, which creates needs for educational tools and things, and the technological availability, which you sort of discussed, can get to be given a specific intentional purpose. So we can argue, as you're saying, well, women are becoming more central members of...
I'm not saying somebody sat down and had a meeting and said, gee, we got to get women involved.
But the question is, to what extent is there a kind of a phenomenon where people begin to see a large population which has the option to have women or other people participate more, where you suddenly don't have a few rich Jews in a very limited number of towns engaged in economic activities, but you have a much larger community and you have to address them. And you also have more rabbis. You have guys going and sitting around and then they got to get a job afterwards. They got to find something to do. So part of it is a function of population growth and things. But I would take it one step further. I wanted to go back to what you said.
Can I just...
Well, give me half a sec. I want to bring the two sides together. On the one hand, all I'm trying to argue is that pointing at phenomena like demography and technology are sort of passive ways of looking at cultural change, right? In other words, without the meeting, without the plan to do anything. But there is another side to this, which you mentioned, but which I think could also be mentioned more, and that is this book, which I haven't read, but based on what you tell us about it, tells women much more about Nida than they could have learned mimetically. That is, the standard for religious behavior is changing.
Or that they needed to know in the first place.
That's
what?
And I said, or that they needed to know.
What I'm thinking is that what this book may reflect, as much as it reflects sort of a reaction to changing circumstances, and as much as it may in fact be a symptom of, even if it's not part of a planning of, a kind of women moving into the center or becoming more agentful, but it is also certainly a reflection, since you have a Slonik, a Talmud of the Ramah, and he sits down, the point is he has changed his perception of what constitutes a legitimate form of behavior for
And what helped him change this? All of a sudden, the print of the Shulchan Aruch, and all of a sudden, Shulchan Aruch has this all listed out for you.
Here you get, let me just throw out, because this is what, I think this raises a serious issue about early modernity that I'm not sure we've touched on yet. And that is, Foucault, but we're talking about a period in which social control becomes a big deal. And this, in a significant sense, the print technology it's not just a passive thing that simply creates reality, but it is there and it is being used to impose a level of social control that's probably 100 years earlier nobody cared about.
Or they couldn't have done.
Yeah, they couldn't have done, or they simply assumed it was okay.
I think we should
just add that in addition to new levels of social control, to the extent that the norm now is to look at a book rather than to ask your mother, there are transmissions that become extinguished.
Oh, yes.
And to that extent, it's analogous to buying cookie dough in the supermarket rather than making it from scratch.
Yeah, I just...
In some way, it refers to the authority of the rabbi, even though he says you don't need to consult the rabbi. The mother is no longer the transmitter. You suddenly have that booklet that the rabbi has.
Just a footnote. The idea of social control, early modern Polish history, Polish history, are not two concepts that go together.
Are not two concepts
that go together very well. Early modern Poland is not Western Europe.
What about Takanot?
But there's not. not a function of social control, isn't it? These are attempts at social control, but it's not happening.
Yeah.
That's how this works.
By the way, just a footnote to this. All the work that's gone on in Italy, the disciplining Paolo Prodi, Adriano Prosperi. This is the big in thing, and of course they hook it up with the Counter Reformation and things like that. Whether I'm not even guessing. Whether you have any reflection of this, any echo of this in text like this, I don't know. But if you do, then perhaps there's a general movement going on throughout Europe, and though printing certainly facilitates the whole thing, we may want to go wider in looking for reasonings. But I'm just off the top of my head.
The book was published in 1577. It was reprinted in 1585, 1595, 1602. And translated and then reprinted a number of times thereafter into Italian. But it's not translated, it's adapted for the Italian audience. Yes. And that will be a project for someone interested in the differences between the Ashkenazi community in Poland and the sensibilities of the Ashkenazi community in northern Italy. If you compared the two works to see where things were taken out or added, you'd have a good idea of how, over a period of time, Ashkenazi communities, they both left Germany, one went to Italy, one went to Poland, how those sensibilities changed. And you would have a decent monitor of that.
And it's published in Latin Cap.
Careful. The manuscript
is in it. No, I know, but it's published.
It's published.